The November rain hammered against the windows of Martinez Auto Repair like bullets on metal, each drop echoing through the garage where Lena Rodriguez wiped grease from her hands with a well-worn rag. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, streaks of oil marking her olive skin as she leaned over the engine of a 1998 Honda Civic. The familiar scent of motor oil and gasoline filled her nostrils, a smell that had become more comforting than her mother's perfume ever was. "Lena, your alternator's shot," she called out to Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman sitting in the waiting area with a steaming cup of coffee. "I can get you a rebuilt one for $300, or we can go new for $550. Either way, you'll be back on the road by Thursday." Mrs. Patterson smiled warmly. "You know I trust your judgment, dear. Whatever you think is best." This was Lena's world now. Honest work, honest people, honest prices. No pretense, no politics, no pressure to be someone she wasn't. At 32, she had built something real here in the small industrial district of Oakland, California. Her shop had a reputation that money couldn't buy: integrity. The shrill ring of her cell phone cut through the steady rhythm of rain. She glanced at the screen and felt her stomach drop. Victoria Rodriguez Sterling flashed across the display. Her older sister, the golden child, calling for the first time in over 2 years. Lena stared at the phone, letting it ring. Victoria never called unless she needed something, and Lena had learned long ago that what Victoria needed usually involved cleaning up messes that the family's money and influence couldn't quite handle. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. Same name, same sinking feeling. "Hey, Mrs. P, I need to take this," Lena said, stepping into her small office at the back of the garage. She closed the door and answered on the 4th ring. "What do you want, Victoria?" "Well, hello to you too, little sister." Victoria's voice carried that familiar, condescending tone, polished smooth by years of private schools and cotillion classes. "I see your manners haven't improved." "Cut the crap. You haven't called me in 2 years. What's the emergency?" There was a pause, and when Victoria spoke again, her voice had lost some of its practiced composure. It's about the house, Lena. The family home. We need to talk." Lena's grip tightened on the phone. The Rodriguez family estate in Marine County, all 15 acres of manicured grounds and Mediterranean architecture, had been in the family for 3 generations. Their great-grandfather had built his shipping fortune there. Their grandfather had entertained politicians and movie stars in those halls, and their father had turned it into a symbol of everything Lena had spent her adult life rejecting. "What? About the house?" "Not over the phone. Can you come home? Tonight?" The word home hit Lena like a wrench to the gut. That place had never been home. Not really. Home was this garage. Home was the small apartment above it where she could walk around in coveralls and no one judged her for having dirt under her fingernails. "I'm working, Victoria. Some of us have actual jobs. Please." The desperation in Victoria's voice was unmistakable now, all pretense stripped away. "It's bad, Lena. Really bad. And you might be the only one who can help." Lena closed her eyes and leaned against her desk. 20 years of family dinners where she was treated like an embarrassment. 20 years of whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room. 20 years of being told she was wasting her potential, throwing away her education, disappointing everyone who mattered. And now they needed her. "I'll be there at 8, she said, and hung up before Victoria could respond. The drive from Oakland to Marin County should have taken 45 minutes, but the rain had turned Highway 101 into a parking lot. Lena sat in her restored 1985 Chevy pickup truck, a vehicle that would have horrified her mother if she were still alive, and watched brake lights blur into red streaks through the rain-soaked windshield. She hadn't been back to the family estate since her father's funeral 3 years ago. Even then, she'd stayed just long enough for the service and left before the reception. The other mourners had barely acknowledged her presence, the black sheep daughter who'd chosen grease over glamour, substance over status. As she turned onto the familiar winding road that led to the estate, memories flooded back with startling clarity. Summer afternoons spent hiding in the gardens while Victoria practiced piano. Christmas mornings when she received practical gifts while her siblings got jewelry and art. The look of disappointment on her father's face when she announced she was dropping out of Stanford to attend trade school. The massive iron gates came into view, still impressive even in the storm. But as Lena's headlights swept across them, she noticed something that made her heart skip. A red foreclosure notice plastered to the right gatepost, rain-soaked but unmistakably official. Her truck's engine rumbled as she pulled up to the intercom, her hands suddenly shaking. This was bigger than she'd imagined. "It's Lena," she said when Victoria's voice crackled through the speaker. The gates swung open with their familiar mechanical groan, and Lena drove slowly up the circular driveway. The estate looked the same, imposing, elegant, untouchable, but there was something different in the way the windows reflected her headlights. Fewer lights were on than she remembered, and the grounds looked less meticulously maintained. Victoria was waiting on the front steps under the stone portico, and even from a distance, Lena could see that her sister looked terrible. Gone was the perfectly styled hair and designer clothing. Victoria wore jeans and a Stanford sweatshirt, her blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked like she'd been crying. Lena parked her truck next to a Mercedes that she didn't recognize and climbed out into the rain. Victoria ran down the steps and, to Lena's complete shock, threw her arms around her in a fierce hug. "Thank you for coming," Victoria whispered, and Lena could hear tears in her voice. "I know I don't deserve it, but thank you." For a moment, Lena just stood there, overwhelmed by the unexpected display of vulnerability from a sister who had spent most of their childhood acting like Lena was an unfortunate charity case the family had to tolerate. "What the hell is going on, Vic?" Victoria pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Come inside. Richard and Catherine are here. We need to explain everything." They walked through the grand foyer, past the marble staircase and crystal chandelier that had intimidated Lena as a child. The house smelled the same, leather furniture polish and expensive flowers, but there was an underlying mustiness that suggested neglect. In the living room, Lena found her brother Richard pacing near the fireplace, while their older sister Catherine sat rigid on the white leather sofa, a glass of wine in her trembling hands. Both looked up when Lena entered, and she saw the same desperate expression on their faces that she'd heard in Victoria's voice. Richard, always the politician, even in crisis, stepped forward with his hand extended. "Lena, thank you for..." "Skip. It." Lena remained near the doorway, her arms crossed. "Just tell me what's happening." Catherine spoke for the first time, her voice hoarse. "Dad's investment firm is being investigated by the FBI. Has been for 6 months. Turns out he was running a Ponzi scheme." The words hit Lena like a physical blow. Their father, Marcus Rodriguez, had been many things: distant, demanding, disappointing, but she'd never suspected he was a criminal. "That's impossible," Lena said automatically. "Dad was obsessed with his reputation. He'd never risk..." "The scandal broke 3 days ago," Victoria interrupted, holding up her phone to show a news article. "Rodriguez Financial Services, a multi-million-dollar fraud. It's everywhere. Wall Street Journal, CNN, local news, the whole thing." Lena took the phone and read the headline: "Prominent Bay Area investment firm accused of defrauding clients of $50 million. Below it was a photo of their father from his last company Christmas party, smiling and holding a champagne glass. The caption read, "Marcus Rodriguez, founder of Rodriguez Financial Services, died in 2022 before charges could be filed." $50 million, Lena whispered. "The worst part," Richard said, running his hands through his hair, "is that most of it was other people's retirement funds. Teachers, firefighters, regular working people who trusted him with their life. Savings." Lena felt sick. She looked around the opulent room, at the imported Italian marble, The original oil paintings, the Persian rugs that cost more than most people made in a year, and realized it had all been built on stolen dreams. So what does this have to do with the house? Catherine finished her wine in one gulp. The FBI has frozen all of Dad's assets. The house, the cars, the art collection, everything. They're liquidating it all to pay back the victims. Good, Lena said and meant it. Those people deserve their money back. But this house isn't just Dad's asset, Victoria said quickly. It belonged to great-grandfather first, then grandfather. It's our family legacy, Lena. 3 generations of Rodriguez. History, built on blood money apparently. Richard stepped closer, his expression desperate. There's a way to save it. The lawyer thinks we might be able to prove that the house was inherited, not purchased with fraudulent funds. But we need to move fast, and we need money for legal fees, and we need... He trailed off, and all 3 siblings stared at Lena with expressions she'd never seen before. Hope. You need me, Lena said, understanding flooding through her. You're the only one who isn't tied up in this mess, Victoria said. Richard worked for Dad's firm for 5 years. They're investigating him too. Catherine's husband was an investor, so she's considered a potential victim and witness. And Victoria's voice broke, and she sat down heavily on the couch next to Catherine. What about you, Vic? I was the chief marketing officer for Rodriguez Financial Services. I created all the promotional materials, recruited new clients, built the whole public image of the company. Tears started flowing again. I didn't know, Lena. I swear to God I didn't know what Dad was doing, but legally I'm considered complicit. The room fell silent, except for the rain still pounding against the windows. Lena looked at her 3 siblings, the golden children who had always made her feel like she didn't belong, and realized they were completely broken. What exactly are you asking me to do? Richard cleared his throat. The legal fees alone will be $200,000 just to get started. If we can prove the house was legitimately inherited, we might be able to keep it, out of the asset seizure. But even then, we'd need to cover the property taxes, maintenance, insurance. You want me to pay to save a house that never felt like home to me, to help a family that spent 30 years treating me like I was an embarrassment? Yes, Catherine said simply. That's exactly what we're asking. Lena walked to the large window, overlooking the gardens where she used to hide as a child. In the darkness and rain, she could barely make out the shapes of the oak trees where she'd climbed to escape family dinners and charity galas. This place held painful memories, but it also held the only happy moments of her childhood. Those stolen hours alone in the gardens, dreaming of a different life. How much? She asked without turning around. Total? Richard's voice was barely above a whisper. Probably close to $500,000, maybe more. Lena laughed, a sound with no humor in it. You think I have $500,000 lying around? I own a garage, not a tech company. But your business is successful, Victoria said. Everyone knows Martinez Auto Repair is the most trusted shop in Oakland, and you've been living so simply, so we thought maybe you'd saved. I have money, Lena said quietly. Not $500,000, but I have money. She turned back to face them, and the hope in their eyes was almost painful to see. 3 years ago, you wouldn't let me sit at the main table at Dad's funeral reception. You put me with the caterers and the staff. Last Christmas, none of you even called. When I got engaged to Sarah 5 years ago, the only response I got was a card from Victoria saying the family hoped I'd reconsider my lifestyle choices. Each word landed like a hammer blow, and she watched her siblings flinch. So tell me, Lena continued, why should I care if you lose this house? Why should I spend my life savings to bail out people who've spent decades making me feel worthless? The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of accumulated hurt and resentment. Finally, Catherine spoke. Because you're better than we are, she said, her voice cracking. You always have been. We treated you terribly because we were jealous and small and scared. You chose to build something real while we just lived off Dad's success. You chose integrity while we chose comfort. And now, when everything's falling apart, you're the only one strong enough to fix it. And because, Victoria added, tears streaming down her face, those people Dad stole from, they're people like you. Working people who trusted him with everything. They had. If we lose this house to the government, the money goes into some general fund that might never reach them. But if you help us fight this legally, really fight it, we might be able to do something more. Lena frowned. What do you mean? Richard leaned forward. I've been thinking about this for days. What if we don't just try to save the house? What if we turn it into something that could actually help pay back Dad's victims? The property is worth about $12 million. If we could prove it's not part of the fraud assets, we could sell it voluntarily and distribute the money directly to the people he hurt. But that would mean losing it forever, Lena said. Maybe that's what needs to happen, Catherine said quietly. Maybe losing the house is our penance for all the years we ignored what was right in front of us. Victoria nodded. The lawyer says, if we cooperate fully with the investigation and make a good faith effort to help the victims, it could reduce the legal consequences for Richard and me. We could start over. Really start over. Without all this... She gestured around the opulent room. Without all this guilt. Lena stared at her siblings, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in her adult life. Not as the spoiled, privileged children who had made her feel small, but as broken people who had finally realized the cost of their father's choices. I need time to think, she said finally. How much time? Richard asked, desperation creeping back into his voice. The foreclosure hearing is in 2 weeks. If we're going to act, we need to... 1 week, Lena said firmly. I'll give you an answer in 1 week. She walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. And I want to see everything. Bank records, legal documents, the FBI investigation files. Everything. If I'm going to risk my life savings, I'm going to know exactly what I'm getting into. Victoria nodded eagerly. Of course. Anything you want. As Lena drove back through the storm, her mind raced with questions and possibilities. Could her siblings really change? Was it worth risking everything she'd built to help people who had never shown her kindness? And most importantly, could she live with herself if she walked away and let those defrauded retirees lose their life savings forever? The rain seemed to follow her all the way back to Oakland. And as she climbed the stairs to her apartment above, the garage, Lena realized that the easy life she'd built for herself was about to get very complicated. But for the first time in years, she felt like she might actually have the power to make a real difference. The question was, would she have the courage to use it? The morning sun broke through the Oakland clouds for the first time in a week, casting long shadows across the garage floor as Lena arrived for work. She'd barely slept, her mind churning with everything she'd learned the night before. The image of that foreclosure notice kept flashing through her thoughts. Red and official and final. Morning, boss, called Jake Martinez, her head mechanic and the best friend she'd never expected to find. He'd worked for her for 6 years, ever since she'd taken a chance on a reformed gang member who knew more about engines than anyone she'd ever met. You look like hell. Thanks for the pep talk, Lena replied, but she was smiling. Jake had a gift for cutting through pretense, and right now she needed that more than sympathy. Coffee's fresh, and Mrs. Chen dropped off some of those almond cookies you like. Said to tell you her Camry's running better than the day she bought it. Lena poured herself a mug of coffee and leaned against her workbench, watching Jake work, on a Ford engine with the precision of a surgeon. This was her real family. The customers who trusted her, the employees who depended on her, the community she'd built one honest repair at a time. Her phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Lawyer. Meeting at 2 p.m. Can you make it? She typed back. Send me the address. By noon, Lena had finished an oil change on a teacher's Honda and diagnosed a transmission problem for a retired postal worker. Normal problems with normal solutions for normal people who worked hard for their money. The contrast with her family's current crisis couldn't have been starker. "Jake, I might need to take some time off in the next few weeks," she said as she washed her hands. "Family stuff." Jake looked up from the engine he was rebuilding. Concern creased across his weathered face. "Everything okay? You never talk about your family. There's a reason for that." Lena dried her hands and grabbed her keys. "Can you handle things if I'm gone for a few days?" "Boss, I could run this place blindfolded. But are you sure you're okay? You've got that look." "What look?" "The same look you had when you found out Peterson's Auto was selling rebuilt parts as new ones. Like you're about to go to war." Lena paused at the door. Jake knew her better than her own siblings did, and his read on her mood was uncomfortably accurate. "Maybe I am," she said. The law offices of Hartwell, Morrison & Associates occupied the 32nd floor of a downtown San Francisco high-rise, all glass and chrome and intimidating views of the bay. Lena felt out of place in her clean jeans and button-down shirt, surrounded by marble floors and abstract art that probably cost more than her truck. Victoria was waiting in the reception area, looking slightly more composed than she had the night before. She'd managed to style her hair and put on makeup, but Lena could see the exhaustion around her eyes. "Thank you for coming," Victoria said, standing to hug her sister. This time, Lena hugged back. "Where are Richard and Catherine?" "Richard's meeting with the FBI today, another round of questioning. Catherine's with her therapist. This whole thing has been hard on her." They were shown into a conference room where a man in his 50s sat behind a table covered with legal documents. James Hartwell had the bearing of someone accustomed to expensive problems, but his handshake was firm and his smile seemed genuine. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm glad you could join us. Your sister has explained your potential involvement in this matter." "Before we go any further," Lena said, "I want to understand exactly what my father did and how bad this really is." Hartwell opened a thick folder and spread several documents across the table. "Your father operated what's known as a Ponzi scheme for approximately 8 years. He told clients he was investing their money in low-risk, high-yield opportunities, government bonds, blue-chip stocks, that sort of thing. In reality, he was using new investors' money to pay returns to existing investors while skimming substantial amounts for personal use." Lena studied the financial statements, her mechanic's mind translating the complex numbers into simpler terms. So it was like robbing Peter to pay Paul, except Dad was also robbing both Peter and Paul. "That's actually a very accurate analogy," Hartwell said, looking slightly surprised. "The scheme worked as long as new money kept coming in, but when the market turned and clients started withdrawing funds last year, the whole structure collapsed." Victoria spoke up. "The worst part is that Dad targeted people he knew would trust him. Teachers from my old high school, members of his country club, families from our church. He used our family's reputation to steal from people who considered him a friend." Lena felt sick reading the list of victims. Maria Santos, a kindergarten teacher who'd invested her entire retirement fund. Bob Williams, a firefighter who'd put his daughter's college money into one of Marcus Rodriguez's guaranteed investment products. Dozens of names, each representing a family whose future had been stolen. "How much can realistically be recovered?" Lena asked. Hartwell leaned back in his chair. "That's the central question. The FBI has identified about $15 million in recoverable assets, bank accounts, investment portfolios, luxury items, but that leaves $35 million unaccounted for." "Where did it go?" "Your father lived very well," Hartwell said diplomatically. "The house, the cars, expensive vacations, art collections. But also, he appears to have hidden significant amounts in offshore accounts that we haven't been able to trace." Victoria pulled out her phone and showed Lena a series of photographs. I found these in Dad's study last week when I was going through his papers. The photos showed Marcus Rodriguez in various exotic locations, standing next to a Ferrari in Monaco, on the deck of a yacht in the Mediterranean, shaking hands with men in expensive suits at what looked like private clubs. I never saw these trips on his calendar, Victoria continued. He must have been hiding them from all of us. Every month or two, he'd disappear for a few days, saying he was visiting clients or attending conferences. Lena stared at the photos, seeing her father in a completely different light. The man who'd lectured her about responsibility and integrity had been living a double life that made her teenage rebellion look like a minor infraction. "So what are our options?" she asked. Hartwell spread out another set of documents. Option 1, do nothing. The house gets seized and auctioned. The proceeds go into the General Recovery Fund, and your siblings face whatever criminal charges the FBI decides to pursue. What kind of charges? For Victoria, potentially conspiracy and wire fraud, though. Her cooperation could reduce that significantly. For Richard, it depends on how much the FBI thinks he knew about his father's activities. Victoria paled. They're saying I could face up to 10 years in prison. Option 2, Hartwell continued. We fight the asset seizure on the grounds that the house was inherited property, not purchased with fraudulent funds. This would require substantial legal fees and isn't guaranteed to succeed. Even if we win, the house would still be subject to massive tax liens and maintenance costs. And option 3? This is where it gets interesting, Hartwell said, leaning forward. We propose what's called a constructive surrender. Instead of fighting the seizure, we cooperate fully with the FBI and propose a victim restitution plan that goes beyond what the court would typically order. Lena frowned. Meaning, what exactly? We voluntarily surrender the house and all other assets, but instead of letting them go through the standard government auction process, we work with the victims directly. We sell the house privately, liquidate everything else, and distribute the proceeds according to a plan that prioritizes the most vulnerable victims. Victoria looked shocked. You want us to give up everything voluntarily? I want you to take control of the narrative, Hartwell said. Right now, you're victims of your father's crimes, scrambling to minimize damage. This approach makes you active participants in the solution. It could significantly reduce criminal penalties and, more importantly, it could get substantially more money to the people your father hurt. Lena studied the lawyer's face, looking for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. What's the catch? The catch is that it requires complete transparency and a significant financial commitment up front. Legal fees, accounting costs, property management expenses while we prepare for sale. We're talking about several $100,000 before we see any recovery. And if Lena doesn't want to take that risk? Victoria asked quietly. Hartwell's expression was grim. Then we go with option 1 and hope the FBI is feeling merciful when it comes to sentencing. The room fell silent, except for the muted sounds of traffic 32 floors below. Lena walked to the window and stared out at the San Francisco Bay, her mind working through the implications of each choice. I need to see the house again, she said finally. Not just the fancy rooms, everything. I want to understand exactly what we're talking about saving or losing. Of course, Victoria said. When? Tomorrow. And I want to meet some of the victims too. Hartwell looked surprised. That's unusual. Most people in your position prefer to keep their distance from that aspect of the case. I'm not most people, Lena said. If I'm going to risk everything I've worked for, I want to look these people in the eye and understand what my father really did to them. Victoria nodded, slowly. I can arrange that. There's a support group that meets twice a week. People who lost money to Dad's scheme. They might be willing to talk to us. Good. Lena gathered her jacket and headed for the door. Set it up for tomorrow evening. And Victoria? Yeah? I want Richard and Catherine there too. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it as a family. All of us together, for the first time in 20 years. As Lena drove back to Oakland, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to make a decision that would change everything. Her simple, honest life was about to get very complicated, but for the first time since Victoria's phone call, she felt like she might be moving towards something meaningful, rather than just running away from her past. The question wasn't whether she could afford to help her family. The question was whether she could afford not to. The support group met in the basement of St. Mary's Catholic Church in Marin County, just 10 miles from the Rodriguez family estate. The irony wasn't lost on Lena as she descended the narrow stairs alongside Victoria, Richard, and Catherine. Their father had attended this very church for over 20 years, shaking hands and sharing pleasantries with many of the people he was secretly stealing from. Victoria's hands trembled as she reached for the door handle. "I don't think I can do this," she whispered. "Yes, you can," Lena said firmly. "We all can. These people deserve to see our faces, and we deserve to understand what Dad really did." The basement room was arranged in a circle of folding chairs, about 15 people seated and talking in hushed tones. The conversation stopped abruptly when the Rodriguez siblings entered, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes stood up from the center of the circle. "I'm Patricia Williams," she said, extending her hand to Lena. "I coordinate our group meetings. You must be the sister we've heard about." "Lena Rodriguez," she replied, shaking the woman's hand and noticing the firm grip of someone accustomed to hard work. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." Patricia gestured to 4 empty chairs. "We weren't sure you'd actually show up. Most of us have been following the news, and we know this can't be easy for any of you." As they took their seats, Lena scanned the circle of faces. She saw a mix of emotions: anger, curiosity, sadness, and something that surprised her: sympathy. These people had every right to hate the Rodriguez family, but instead, many of them looked like they simply wanted answers. "Why don't we start with introductions?" Patricia suggested. "Maria, would you like to go first?" A small Latina woman in her 50s nodded nervously. "I'm Maria Santos. I teach kindergarten at Maple Elementary, and I invested my entire retirement fund with Marcus Rodriguez 5 years ago. $43,000. Everything I'd saved in 28 years of teaching." Her voice broke slightly, and Victoria made a small sound of distress. Maria looked directly at her. "I trusted your father because my neighbor recommended him, and because he seemed so honest. He came to my house for dinner, met my children, talked about how important it was for teachers to have secure retirements." She paused, wiping her eyes. "I was planning to retire next year. Now I'll probably have to work until I'm 70. The next person to speak was a man in his 70s, with calloused hands and weary eyes. "Bob Williams, retired firefighter. I gave Marcus Rodriguez $58,000, money I'd been saving for my granddaughter's college education. She starts at UC Davis in the fall, and now I don't know how we're going to pay for it." One by one, they shared their stories. Janet Chen, a widow who'd invested her late husband's life insurance money. David Park, a postal worker who'd put his disability settlement into one of Marcus's guaranteed funds. Each story hit Lena like a physical blow, and she could see her siblings struggling not to break down completely. Finally, Patricia turned to the Rodriguez family. "We appreciate you coming here tonight. Most of us have questions, and some of us are angry. But we're also parents and grandparents, and we understand that children aren't responsible for their parents' sins." Richard cleared his throat. "We want you to know that we had no idea what our father was doing. I worked for his company, and I thought I was helping people plan for their futures. I never imagined." He stopped, unable to continue. "The marketing, materials I created," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "All those brochures and presentations about guaranteed returns and safe investments. I believed every word. I thought I was helping Dad build something good. Catherine spoke for the first time since entering the room. Our father fooled all of us. But that doesn't make your pain any less real, and it doesn't excuse the fact that our family benefited from stolen money. An older man near the back of the circle leaned forward. What are you planning to do about it? All eyes turned to Lena, and she realized that this was the moment everything had been building toward. She thought about her comfortable life above the garage, her steady income, her simple pleasures. Then she looked at Maria Santos's worn hands and Bob Williams' tired eyes. We're going to give you everything, she said quietly. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Patricia held up her hand for silence. What do you mean by everything? Lena stood up, feeling more certain with each word she spoke. The house, the cars, the art collection, the furniture. Everything our father bought with your money. We're not going to fight the asset seizure or try to keep anything for ourselves. Instead, we're going to work with the FBI and the Victims' Compensation Fund to make sure you get back as much as possible. But the legal costs alone, Richard started. I'll cover the legal costs, Lena said, looking directly at her brother. I've saved money over the years, and I'll use whatever it takes to make this right. Victoria stood up beside her sister. And I'm going to spend the next 5 years, or however long it takes, working to track down every penny Dad hid. I helped build his public image. Now I'm going to tear it down and find the money he stole. Maria Santos was crying now, but she was also smiling. You would really do that? Give up your family home? That house was never really our home, Catherine said, standing to join her sisters. It was built on lies and other people's dreams. Maybe it's time for it to serve a better purpose. Bob Williams shook his head in amazement. I've been so angry for so long. At your father, at myself for being fooled, at the whole situation. But sitting here, listening to you, I think maybe there's hope for some kind of justice after all. Patricia looked around the circle at her group members. I think I speak for all of us when I say that your offer is both generous and unexpected. But are you certain you can follow through? The legal process will be complicated and expensive. Richard finally stood, completing the family circle. Our sister Lena has integrity that the rest of us are still learning about. If she says she'll do something, she'll do it. And we're going to help her, not because we have to, but because it's the right thing to do. The meeting continued for another hour, with the victims asking detailed questions about the recovery process, and the Rodriguez siblings sharing everything they knew about their father's hidden assets. By the time they left, Lena felt emotionally drained, but strangely hopeful. As they walked to their cars in the church parking lot, Victoria grabbed Lena's arm. Are you sure about this? You're talking about risking everything you've worked for. I'm sure, Lena said. For the first time in my adult life, I'm completely sure about something involving this family. But what if we can't recover enough? Money to make it worthwhile? Catherine asked. What if you spend your life savings and those people still don't get their retirements back? Lena looked back at the church, thinking about the faces in that basement room. Then at least we'll know we tried. At least we'll be able to look at ourselves in the mirror and know we did everything we could to make it right. Richard kicked at a loose stone in the parking lot. I keep thinking about all the family dinners where Dad would lecture us about character and responsibility. How did we miss the fact that he was lying to us every single day? Because we didn't want to see it, Lena said bluntly. The expensive cars, the luxury vacations, the way money never seemed to be a problem. We enjoyed the benefits too much to ask uncomfortable questions. You didn't, Victoria pointed out. You got out. You chose a different path. I ran away, Lena corrected. There's a difference. I was so focused on rejecting everything Dad represented that I never stopped to think about the people who might be getting hurt along the way. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of decades of family dysfunction finally being acknowledged openly. So what happens now? Catherine asked. Lena pulled out her phone and checked the time. Now we go back to the house, and we start making a list of everything that needs to be liquidated. Tomorrow, I call my lawyer and start the process of funding this operation, and then we work, harder than any of us have ever worked before, to make sure those people get their money back. What about your garage? Richard asked. Your business? Jake can run it for a while. And honestly, I think I need to do this. Not just for them, but for me. I've spent so many years being angry at this family that I forgot we might actually be capable of doing something good together. As they drove back to the estate, following each other through the winding Marin County roads, Lena felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. The easy life she'd built was about to disappear, replaced by months or years of legal battles and financial uncertainty. But for the first time since childhood, she felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. The next morning brought a fog that rolled in from the Pacific Ocean, wrapping the Rodriguez estate in a gray shroud that seemed fitting for the work ahead. Lena arrived at 8 a.m. to find Victoria already in their father's study, surrounded by boxes of financial documents. "I've been here since 5, Victoria said, looking up from a stack of bank statements. "I couldn't sleep, so I figured I might as well be productive." "Find anything interesting?" Victoria held up a leather-bound notebook filled with their father's handwriting. Travel receipts, expense reports, meeting notes, all from trips none of us knew about. "Look at this." She showed Lena a page covered with numbers and abbreviated notes. Cayman, 2.3 M transferred. Swiss ACC, 1.8 M cleared. Monaco meeting, new. Structure discussed. "He kept records of everything," Lena said, amazed. "Dad always was obsessive about documentation. There's more." Victoria pulled out a manila folder. "I found this hidden behind a false back in his desk drawer. It's a list of offshore accounts with partial routing numbers and contact information for lawyers in 5 different countries." Lena studied the documents, her mechanic's brain working to decode the patterns. These dates correspond to his mysterious trips. Every time he disappeared for a few days, money disappeared from the main accounts. The question is, how much is still out there, and can we get to it before the statute of limitations runs out? The sound of footsteps in the hallway announced Richard's arrival. He looked better than he had in days, as if having a clear purpose had restored some of his natural confidence. "I just got off the phone with Hartwell," he said. "The FBI is interested in our cooperation proposal, but they want detailed documentation of everything we're planning to do." "Good," Lena said. "Transparency works in our favor. What about the house appraisal?" "The real estate agent will be here this afternoon. Based on comparable sales in the area, we're looking at somewhere between 10 and 15 million, depending on how quickly we want to sell." Catherine appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray of coffee and pastries from the kitchen. "I thought you might need fuel for the long day ahead." As they sat around their father's desk, dividing up tasks and responsibilities, Lena was struck by how different this felt from every other family meeting she could remember. Instead of competition and judgment, there was collaboration and shared purpose. "I want to be clear about something," she said, setting down her coffee cup. "I'm not doing this to rebuild our family relationships or to make up for years of feeling like an outsider. I'm doing this because those people in that church basement deserve justice, and we're the only ones who can give it to them." Victoria nodded. "I understand. And I want you to know that seeing you take charge like this, seeing the person you've become, it makes me realize how wrong we were about everything." "We can talk about family dynamics later," Lena said, standing up. "Right now we have work to do." The next several hours passed in a blur of activity. The real estate agent arrived and spent 2 hours photographing and measuring every room. An appraiser cataloged the art collection, furniture, and other valuables. A forensic accountant began sorting through boxes of financial records, looking for patterns that might lead to hidden assets. By late afternoon, they had a preliminary assessment. The house and contents were worth approximately $13 million. Combined with the $15 million the FBI had already recovered, They were looking at $28 million in total assets, still $7 million short of the full amount stolen, but significantly better than anyone had initially hoped. The key, now, Richard explained as they gathered in the living room, is maximizing the recovery from those offshore accounts. If we can prove that Dad moved money illegally, we might be able to force foreign banks to cooperate with the investigation. Lena looked around the opulent room one last time, trying to reconcile her childhood memories with her adult understanding of how it had all been paid for. The marble fireplace where she'd hung her Christmas stocking had been purchased with a teacher's retirement fund. The crystal chandelier that had intimidated her as a child represented dozens of families' college savings. "How long will the whole process take?" she asked. "Best case scenario, about 18 months, Richard replied. "Worst case, it could drag on for 3 or 4 years." "And you're prepared to commit to this for that long?" Catherine asked Lena. "To put your own life on hold while we chase down Dad's hidden money?" Lena thought about her garage, about Jake and her regular customers, about the simple life she'd built that had felt so satisfying just a week ago. Then she thought about Maria Santos, working extra years because she trusted the wrong person with her future. "I'm committed," she said. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes." Victoria stood up and walked to the window overlooking the gardens. "I keep thinking about something Patricia Williams said last night. She said that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the thing that shows you who you really are." "What do you think she meant?" Catherine asked. "I think she meant that losing everything Dad built gives us a chance to build something better." Victoria turned back to face her sisters and brother. "For the first time in our lives, we get to choose what the Rodriguez family name means," Richard nodded slowly. "Instead of being known as the family that stole from teachers and firefighters, we could be known as the family that gave everything back. It's not going to be easy," Lena warned. "There will be setbacks, legal complications, moments when we want to give up. And we'll be doing it all under public scrutiny, with reporters and FBI agents watching our every move. I'd rather be watched while doing the right thing than ignored while doing nothing," Catherine said quietly. As the sun set over Marin County, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the 4 Rodriguez siblings sat together in the house that had divided them for so many years, united for the first time by a purpose larger than their individual grievances. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: legal filings, media interviews, the complex process of turning their father's legacy of fraud into their own legacy of redemption. But tonight, for the first time in decades, they felt like a family. And Lena realized that sometimes the black sheep isn't the one who's lost. Sometimes the black sheep is the one who finds the way home. 8 months later, Lena stood in the empty living room of the Rodriguez estate, her footsteps echoing off the marble floors. The chandelier had been removed, the furniture sold, the art collection donated to museums. Even the Persian rugs were gone, leaving behind geometric patterns of clean marble where they had once lay. The house had sold for $12.8 million to a tech entrepreneur who planned to renovate it completely. In a few weeks, construction crews would arrive to tear out the marble and replace it with sustainable materials, to modernize the kitchen and add solar panels to the roof. The Rodriguez family legacy would be erased, replaced by someone else's vision of success. Lena walked through the empty rooms, remembering the last 8 months with a mixture of exhaustion and pride. The legal battles had been more complex than anyone anticipated. The media attention had been relentless, and the personal cost had been higher than she'd expected. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Mrs. Patterson's Honda is ready. She asked when you're coming back," she typed back. "Soon, maybe sooner than I thought." The sound of car doors slamming announced the arrival of her siblings. They had all gathered today for the final walkthrough, before officially handing over the keys to the new owner. Victoria appeared in the doorway, looking dramatically different from the polished socialite Lena had encountered 8 months ago. Her hair was shorter, her clothes more practical, and her face had the lean look of someone who'd been working hard and sleeping little, but her eyes were brighter than Lena had ever seen them. The last wire transfer went through this morning, Victoria announced. Maria Santos will receive her full retirement fund plus interest. Bob Williams gets enough for his granddaughter's entire college education. Everyone on the victim list receives complete restitution. Richard and Catherine joined them in the empty room, both looking equally transformed by the months of intensive work. Richard had lost weight and gained gray hair, but he carried himself with a confidence that hadn't been there before. The confidence of someone who'd earned his reputation rather than inherited it. Total recovery? Lena asked. $47 million, Richard said, unable to hide his satisfaction. The offshore accounts yielded more than we'd hoped. Dad was apparently better at hiding money than spending it. Catherine held up her phone, showing a news article. The Chronicle ran a feature story yesterday. The Rodriguez family, from scandal to redemption. They're calling it one of the most successful victim restitution cases in California history. Lena nodded, but she felt strangely disconnected from the praise. 8 months ago, she'd thought success would feel different, more triumphant, more satisfying. Instead, she felt tired and oddly empty. The FBI is officially closing the investigation. Next week, Victoria added, no criminal charges will be filed against any of us. Our cooperation in the full restitution convinced them that we were victims of Dad's deception rather than accomplices. And your job prospects? Lena asked Richard. Better than I expected. Turns out that voluntarily giving up millions of dollars to help fraud victims is the kind of experience that makes you attractive to ethical investment firms. I have 3 offers from companies that specialize in fiduciary responsibility. What about you, Vic? Victoria smiled. I'm starting a consulting firm that helps families and businesses recover from financial fraud. Turns out I'm really good at tracking down hidden assets. Who knew? Catherine joined the conversation. And I'm going back to school to become a certified financial planner. I want to help people like Maria Santos make better investment decisions so they never have to go through what we put them through. They stood in comfortable silence, looking around the empty room that had once been the center of their dysfunctional family life. Outside, the gardens were already beginning to look overgrown without the army of landscapers who had maintained them. Any regrets? Richard asked. None, Victoria said immediately. This has been the hardest year of my life, but also the most meaningful. I keep thinking about Dad, Catherine said quietly, about how proud he would have been if we'd used our education and resources to help people, instead of just accumulating more wealth. Maybe this is what he would have wanted us to do, if he'd been a different person. Lena walked to the window, where she'd stood so many times over the past months, looking out at the oak trees where she'd hidden as a child. I think Dad would have been horrified by what we did. He spent his whole life building walls between us and the rest of the world. We tore those walls down. Speaking of tearing down walls, Victoria said, what are you going to do now? Your garage has been doing fine without you, but I know you miss it. The question Lena had been avoiding for weeks hung in the air between them. Her business had indeed survived her absence. Jake had proven himself more than capable of running operations, and her regular customers had remained loyal. She could go back to her old life, to the simple satisfaction of fixing cars and solving mechanical problems. But something had changed in her during these months of fighting for justice. The work had been consuming and stressful, but it had also been important in a way that changing oil and replacing brake pads never could be. I've been thinking about that, Lena said slowly. Jake's been running the garage so well that he doesn't really need me anymore. And I've learned that I'm apparently good at more than just fixing engines. What do you mean? Richard asked. Lena turned back to face her siblings. I mean, that maybe it's time for me to do something bigger. The Rodriguez name used to be associated with fraud and betrayal. Now it's associated with integrity and justice. Maybe there's a way to build on that. Victoria's eyes lit up. Are you thinking about joining my consulting firm? I'm thinking about starting a foundation, Lena said, the idea crystallizing as she spoke. A nonprofit that helps families recover from financial fraud, but also helps prevent it in the first place. Financial literacy education, investigation services, legal support, all the things we wish had been available to Dad's victims. Catherine nodded enthusiastically. You could use some of the money you've saved, plus donations from people who've followed our story. There's been a lot of media attention, and most of it has been positive. The Rodriguez Foundation for Financial Justice, Richard said, trying out the name. I like it, and I know several ethical investment firms that would be interested in supporting something like that. As they talked through the possibilities, Lena felt something she hadn't experienced in months: excitement about the future. Not the quiet satisfaction of her old life, but the energizing prospect of tackling bigger challenges and making a broader impact. There's something else, Victoria said, pulling out an envelope. This came to our lawyer's office yesterday. It's addressed to all of us. She handed the envelope to Lena, who recognized the careful handwriting immediately. It was from Patricia Williams, the support group coordinator, who had been so gracious during their first difficult meeting. Lena opened the letter and read aloud. Dear Rodriguez family, on behalf of all the victims of your father's fraud, I want to thank you for what you've accomplished over the past 8 months. When you first came to our support group meeting, many of us were skeptical. We'd been hurt so deeply that it was hard to believe anyone from your family could be trusted. You proved us wrong in the best possible way. Not only did you return every penny that was stolen from us, but you did it with a grace and determination that restored our faith in human nature. You could have fought to keep your family's wealth, or negotiated for a partial settlement, or simply walked away from the whole mess. Instead, you chose to sacrifice everything for the sake of justice. Maria Santos called me yesterday to tell me that she's officially retiring next month, with full financial security. Bob Williams' granddaughter graduated from UC Davis last week, with no student loan debt. Every person in our support group has had their life restored because of your family's actions. We know that you've paid a high price for your father's crimes, but we want you to know that your sacrifice has meaning. You've shown us that integrity still exists in this world, and that sometimes the children can be better than their parents. We will never forget what you did for us. With deep gratitude and respect, Patricia Williams and the support group for financial fraud victims. By the time Lena finished reading, all 4 siblings were crying. Victoria was the first to speak. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm proud to be a Rodriguez. Me too, Richard said, wiping his eyes. For the first time in my adult life, I'm proud of what our family name represents. Catherine nodded. Dad wanted us to inherit his legacy. We just never realized we had the power to choose what that legacy would be. As they prepared to leave the empty house for the last time, Lena took one final look around the room where she'd felt so out of place as a child. The marble floors and crystal fixtures had intimidated her then, symbols of a world where she didn't belong. Now she understood that she'd been right not to belong to that world. But she'd also learned that belonging to something didn't mean accepting it as it was. Sometimes it meant having the courage to change it into something better. Ready to go? Victoria asked, holding the front door open. Lena nodded. I'm ready. As they walked out of the Rodriguez estate for the last time, Lena felt something she'd never experienced before. The satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the black sheep of the family turns out to be exactly what the family needs. Behind them, the empty house stood as a monument to a different kind of success. Not the accumulation of wealth, but the courage to give it all away for the sake of doing what's right. And ahead of them lay the future they'd chosen. Harder than the lives they'd left behind, but infinitely more meaningful. The Rodriguez Foundation for Financial Justice would open its doors 6 months later, funded by Lena's savings and donations from people inspired by their story. Victoria's consulting firm would become one of the most successful asset recovery services on the West Coast. Richard would pioneer new approaches to ethical investing that prioritize transparency and client protection. Catherine would help hundreds of families make informed financial decisions that protected them from predators like their father. But all of that was still to come. For now, they were simply 4 siblings who had learned that family isn't about where you come from. It's about what you choose to do with the name you carry. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give your family is the courage to change what that name means to the world. As Lena drove back to Oakland, she thought about Maria Santos, probably planning her retirement party. She thought about Bob Williams, probably proudly watching his granddaughter start her career debt-free. She thought about all the families who would sleep better tonight because the Rodriguez siblings had chosen justice over comfort. For 32 years, she'd been running from her family's legacy. It had taken her 8 months to realize that. She wasn't meant to run from it. She was meant to transform it. The black sheep had finally come home. And in doing so, she'd shown her family the way home too.